When women are empowered, communities change. So that means the lives of children change. It means the fabric of our society changes. Every institution improves and gets healthier.
Well, hello there and welcome back into the Direct Selling Accelerator podcast. I'm your host, Sam Hind, and I have been hanging out to record this episode for you, our amazing listeners, for literally years. This episode is one that many of you have been asking for. We've been promising, and I know that this is going to come at the perfect time for many of you. Today, I get to introduce you to an incredibly special guest, but also a very, very special friend, somebody who literally, I would say, changed the trajectory of our marriage, but also our business through better understanding ourselves. Today, I get to introduce you to the incredible Sharon O'Neill. Sharon O'Neill is an Enneagram coach, a pastor, a grandmother, a dedicated wife, social worker, and advocate for human rights, women, and women empowerment. And today you get to hear from this incredible woman who's been such an important part of our lives and has been so supportive of our journey. I've been speaking to Sharon about doing this episode for a very long time, and today was the day that we got to record this episode for you, where we talked all about understanding ourselves better through the Enneagram Personality Assessment Tool. Now, Sharon's going to explain in depth a little bit more about what this tool is and how you can better understand yourself and those around you by using it. She's going to talk about the 9 different Enneagram types. I know you will find this a fascinating episode, but can I just encourage you? Open your ears, your hearts up, listen in, because there is so much to be gained from understanding ourselves better and how we interact with the world. But I just want to throw it out there. This tool has helped us to have more love and grace for ourselves and more understanding about how we interact with each other and with the world. And I know that this is going to be really powerful for you as well. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn over now to the episode, and I really hope you enjoy this. So open up your hearts, listen on in, and I'm sure you're in the right place at the right time today if you are listening into this episode. Don't forget, if this one's been really powerful for you, please share it with somebody who you think might also gain from this. And don't forget to subscribe. We do have some wonderful show notes in here as well with some helpful links along the way. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over now and introduce you to the beautiful and amazing Sharon O'Neill. Hello there and welcome back in to the Direct Selling Accelerator podcast. I'm not only joined today by a very special guest, but she's actually in the room with me, which is crazy. This never happens. So welcome on in, Sharon. I'm so excited to have you with me today.
I'm excited to be here too. And it's nice to be able to do it live, I think, with us sitting side by side.
It is. And this particular topic, like we get to talk about social media and business and all of those things, which are great. But this particular topic, I've been talking to you about having this conversation for literally a couple of years. And I am so excited to finally be able to have this conversation on the podcast. I know many, many, many of our listeners have been hanging out for us to talk about the Enneagram. They've heard Greg and I talk about it. Mm-hmm. So what we've actually done is we've pulled in the very person who introduced us to the Enneagram and, you know, the best, I guess, most knowledgeable person I know around this to talk to all of you guys about it. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too because I love talking about the Enneagram because I just think it's just such a powerful tool. It's just one of those tools that just helps you grow, and you have all these aha moments and you kind of go, oh, that's why I think that, feel that, do that. Oh, that's why they do that. And I think if everyone on the planet did the Enneagram, I think there'd be a lot more compassion and empathy.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think too, so much more self-understanding, but also self-grace.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to all of that. But maybe before we talk about the Enneagram, you're a very, very dear friend. And, you know, Greg and I have had the honor of, getting to know you over many years. In fact, I feel like it'd have to be, I'm just trying to think back to how long we've known each other for.
Would have been when you had your last baby.
Well, that was 11 years ago. That was a little while ago. It was over a decade. And you've been such a special part of our lives, even through, our marriage and our working together. And, we've got to really get to know you. And I love what you do, and I love the passion that you have, particularly for women. Mm-hmm. I mean, you love men too, of course.
Yeah.
But the thing is that you're so passionate about, marriage and, women and women in business and, women empowerment and all of those amazing things. Do you want to just share a little bit with our listeners about you and your journey and I guess how you came to be in the position where you said, you know what, I like the Enneagram's a really important part of this whole process?
Yeah, sure. So I trained as a social worker, and I loved training. I loved being a social worker. I love justice, and I get really upset when there's an injustice or when there's inequity. So that's partly why I'm so for women. Also, I also know that when we empower women and women get into positions of leadership, whether that be in business or community or on boards or in churches or whatever, the whole community changes. So it's just a totally different dynamic. And so over the years, I've constantly looked for tools that will do anything that will boost women's self-awareness, their confidence, and also their ability to grow. Because often we feel that shame, don't we? And we feel like this is who we are. And there are parts of us, I think women are very aware of parts of themselves that they don't like or that they aren't comfortable with. And often we don't realise those parts can also be a strength. And they're a weapon, but they can also be tempered and they can be grown and they can be matured. So anything that will empower women, because I just know that when women are empowered, communities change. So that means the lives of children change. It means the fabric of our society changes. Every institution improves and gets healthier. So I'm pretty passionate in that space.
Yeah.
I'm also a pastor, so I love that spiritual dynamic. I felt that social work and justice wasn't enough. I needed that spiritual component, so that's why I'm a pastor. And I love social justice, so I love advocating where I see inequity happening.
Yeah. And you certainly do that with so much courage and power as well. And
it's called menopause. You get to this stage in life where you just go, I'm done pussyfooting.
I was actually having a little bit of a laugh with Greg. Look, this is a safe zone today. Like, this is a women conversation, right? So men, if you're listening, it's okay for you to be tuning in.
We love you.
We love you, but just, FYI. I was having a conversation with Greg early on in my pregnancy. By the way, if you hear any squelching going on here, it is not me passing wind. I'm sitting on a Fitball right now, which is making some funky noises in the background. But early on in my pregnancy, I said to Greg, it's just occurred to me that I think being a woman is unfair. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, well, let's put it this way. When you become a teenager, you go into puberty, and then, suddenly you're having a period every month, and that's painful and frustrating. Then when you become an adult and you get married, you then have, you fall pregnant and you have to go through this period of pregnancy. And whilst that's all lovely, it's got its cons as well. Your whole body gets taken over. Then you go through childbirth. And then when you feel like that season is over, you go through menopause. I said, that should be for the man. It even says it at the start, menopause. It's not fair. What do you guys go through? Anyway, he had all sorts of arguments, and I thought, I can't believe you're arguing with me over this. And I was telling a few female friends, and they were laughing their heads off, thinking that is hilarious that he tried to argue that point, that no, men have got equal challenges when it comes to physical issues. And I was like, I don't think so.
It's very different, isn't it?
It's very, very different. I said, I feel like our body is on the line and our hormones are on the line for our entire lives. And you guys just, play golf and which we talked about before. But look, it is a really interesting process. I guess, to switch that subject just a little to the Enneagram, because one of the things and the reasons that we came into contact with you about this was because, Greg and I are on our second marriage, and, being in business together and being married and having that past history and baggage all creates a lot of challenge. And so in those early days of marriage, we came to you and we wanted to talk through a lot of that so that we could be stronger in business and in marriage and as parents and all of those things. And you actually introduced us to the Enneagram at that time. And one of the things that we didn't realize was that we all interact in such different ways, and we often see the things that make us different and that challenge each other as, and you just said before, as inadequacies or things that are wrong with us.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. This process that you're going to talk about today helped us learn so much more about ourselves and how we interact with the world, and also our loved ones and how they interact with the world, so that there was more grace and understanding.
Totally.
How would you best explain the Enneagram for someone who hasn't heard of it before and doesn't really know what we're talking about right now?
So it's just a tool. It's just a personality tool that just helps you discover who you are. So we're all kind of in a box. None of us like that concept of being in a box, but we are in a box. And then it helps you understand the box that you're in, but it also gives you understanding and tools of how to get out of the box, how to grow, how to change, how to soften, how to move towards other people. But it also helps you understand the box that other people are in, which is where the compassion happens. So it's a self-discovery tool. And I also think it's a great transformation tool. So it's a tool that enables you to actually change.
Yeah.
And often that's the part where we all get stuck, because we don't know how to change, and we stick at that. You might go to counselling and they might say, oh, you've got to have coffee with one another more regularly, or, you've got to make eye contact. But it doesn't deal with the nitty-gritty of what's going on underneath, like a duck paddling under the water. And once you start to become aware of some of those motivations or fears or worries or concerns, then you kind of know what's triggering you in certain situations, and you kind of go, oh, I'm actually feeling stressed here right now.
Yep.
You hear yourself powering up, or you hear yourself withdrawing, and all of a sudden you can kind of go, oh, something's happening here. And then you can ask those deeper questions of what's happening, and then you can make adjustments, and you can apologise to one another. I find it helps you run faster towards forgiveness and reconciliation.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think the interesting thing I found about doing the Enneagram was, first, it helped me understand so much more about why I behaved in certain ways in certain situations. And the funny thing about it was, many of the things that it helped me realize were the very things I disliked most about myself, because over the years, they were the things that would trigger and challenge other people. And so I then decided these are bad things about me, and you start squashing them or hating them.
Yeah.
And of course, it's like you're squashing part of who you are.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go away. You can't erase it. Yeah. And so then you start to become resentful of yourself and hate yourself, because you think there's something within me that's wrong with me that challenges other people. But in actual fact, once you've done this process and you realize that's actually a part of who I am, and it doesn't mean that I need to walk around challenging everyone, but it does mean that I need to maybe have some more awareness around, and grace and love and acceptance for that part of me, but also recognize the part of other people that gets challenged by that as well. And, after doing this work with you, and we'll talk about the Enneagram types shortly, but one of the things that I became really fascinated by was actually starting to observe and trying to understand better what Enneagram type other people were, so I could see how I was interacting and better connect with those people. And it certainly changed our marriage, that's for sure. And there are things that we can now see in each other, in advance. So I know if I behave this way, it's going to result in Greg behaving this way, and I can see in advance what's going to unravel. Therefore, okay, do I need to just adjust this slightly or my approach slightly? But also he can do the same thing and go, okay, I can see why Sam's doing that now. And that's, you know, something as well to have some love and grace for and adjust his response. So really powerful.
Because what it does is it challenges shame, and shame is, I think, one of the most destructive emotions that we can have, because it forces us to hide. And so when you have language that can help you, it means that you can embrace the strength of who you are. You can have a laugh about who you are.
Yeah.
But it just means that shame's no longer a part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And so things don't stay hidden, and you can actually have conversations. So you can have conversations with colleagues, you can have conversations with your partner.
Yeah.
So everything just comes out into the open. So then we're working in that space that Brené Brown talks about in terms of vulnerability. So we can be vulnerable, we can be ourselves, we can be confident in that space, because shame's gone.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too with that is once you understand better where you sit, it also allowed me to connect with some other individuals who, you know, and we've got a mutual friend who is the same Enneagram type as me. And I've known her for many years, but I didn't realize the reason we click and challenge each other so much, because it goes both ways, is because we're actually exactly the same Enneagram type. And so one of the funny things about that is I know when I'm having a particular challenge, and I recognize that my that part of me comes out, that I can actually call her and say, here's what I'm battling with, here's how I want to respond. I'm not sure that is going to be the best way to handle this. What would you do? What have you done in similar situations? And it allows you to connect with other people as well in a different way, because you're looking at it from the perspective of, this is who I am. And I love that part of me now. I'm learning to love that part of me now. I have some grace for it, but I also recognize I can't ignore it. You know, I can't just push it to the side and say it doesn't exist and I don't want it there. But it is a choice you can now make of how you're going to respond to the world, and also how you're going to interact with your kids, your partner, your friends, knowing those things about yourself.
And that's a really powerful step too, to find people who are the same on the Enneagram as yourself and have that conversation, because you guys know each other, understand in a way that I, even as an Enneagram coach, wouldn't understand.
Yes.
And so just that peer-to-peer knowledge and mentoring coaching is just really powerful.
Well, it also allows you to laugh about it.
Yeah, totally.
And that's the funny thing. You know, we can, you know, I'm an Enneagram type 8, and we're going to talk about these shortly, but I can call this person and say, hey, my 8's coming out right now, and she'll laugh and she'll go, yep, totally hear you. Okay, been in that position. Here are a couple of things I would suggest, or here's what I did, wouldn't do it that way again. Here's maybe what you could try. And so it's a way of lightening the load a little bit and going, I'm not alone in this. You know, there's nothing wrong with me. It's just that's who I am. And that's a special part of what makes me. And this is the thing I'm sure you'll talk about, Sharon, is that there's two sides.
Yes.
There's the two sides to your Enneagram type, and there's, you know, that healthy side and that unhealthy side, but it's recognizing as well that there is incredible positives and benefits to every Enneagram type. And so instead of looking at yourself and going, this part of me is something I dislike, because it challenges people, it's also partly what makes you so powerful as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think we should probably talk about what so there are 9 Enneagram types, right?
There are, and it's in a wheel. So if you Google it, you'll see the image. It'll come up, so it's in a wheel. So you've got your 8, 9s and 1s, and they're in what we call the gut triad. So those personalities, the 8, 9s and 1s, if you listen to them closely enough, they'll say, my gut's telling me to do this. My gut, I'm just not sure about that. I just doesn't sit comfortably with my gut. So they're very gut. She's nodding. She's saying that.
I think I've said that 4 or 5 times today, and possibly already in this episode.
Yeah. So your 8s are your challenges. So they have the most amount of energy of all the Enneagram types. You know, they're just real power people. They can just get in and get things done. They're people who have a very strong social justice part to them. They want to protect. So, for example, Mother Teresa was probably an 8. I mean, we don't know because she's not around to ask. But when you look at the culture and the time in history when she was trying to do the compassion work, and the fact that she was a Christian nun in a Hindu culture, in a very patriarchal culture, I can't see any other Enneagram type being able to have the resolve, the big picture. Often 8s are really big picture, visionary kind of people. When they see something, they go out and they go out hard after it. And if they see mistreatment, they will just protect. Their big struggle is they struggle to be vulnerable. So whilst they can protect other people, actually being vulnerable about their own feelings can be really difficult. So, for example, it might be that you have a daughter who loses a child. As an Enneagram 8, you can become very protective of that child and want to look after that child and do everything for that child. But in the process, you can forget to say, I'm really sad because I lost my child. I lost my grandchild, or and it really hurts. And it can be hard to know, well, what do I do with those feelings? What do I do with that discomfort? So it can be hard to be vulnerable as an 8.
Yeah.
But the gift that they bring is just this big picture, big vision, power, energy, protection. One of the youth services here in our small little regional area, it's headed by an Enneagram 8, and look what he's doing with kids that are engaged with the justice system is just phenomenal. And I don't know anybody else, any other personality type that could initiate what he's initiating. So it's so cool. And then in that triad, also you've got the 9, who's the peacemaker. So they're the people who are very laid back, very earthy. They sit at the top of the Enneagram and they can kind of see everybody's viewpoint, and that's their gift. That's their they can sit in a meeting and they can kind of go, oh, yeah, I agree with that viewpoint, or, oh, yeah, I can agree with that totally opposing viewpoint. You can see all the sides. They're really good at building connection and peace and harmony, and people often feel safe when they're around a 9. They'll feel like, they're comfortable. One of the complexities with an Enneagram 9 is that they can just merge with everybody else's personality, and so you don't really know what they really think or what they really want, because it can be hard for them to actually say for themselves what they want. So, for example, I've got a couple of Enneagram 9s in my family. So even if it comes down to, I will never ask them, where do you want to go out for a meal on, say, Friday night? I'll sort of say, do you want Thai or do you want Chinese? And then they'll tell me. Whereas if I just have this broad question, what do you feel like in terms of takeaway or, going out, so they wouldn't be able to tell me. They'll go, oh, whatever you want.
Yeah.
And then your 1s in that gut triad, they're your perfectionists. They're the people who want to make sure that everything's done well. They're the reformers. They want to make sure our systems and our processes in government or in schools, or they want to make sure that everything's done with integrity, that it's right, that it's good, that it's truthful. And if you're going to do a job, don't do it more than once. Just do it once and do it really, really, really well. So the problem with the 1s is that they've got this inner critic that just goes on and on and on from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, which is always telling them that they're not measuring up, or that they're not good enough, or they haven't somehow done the right thing, they haven't had enough integrity. So they've got that inner critic thing. And I've found with most 1s, once they've understood that it's not a mental health issue, that it's just their personality, the freedom and the relief has just been amazing.
Yeah.
So they're the ones that are in the gut triad.
Yep.
And then in the feeling triad, we've got the 2s, the 3s and the 4s. So these are the kinds of people So I'm a 2. So you'll often hear me say, I feel this, I feel that, I feel. So the 2s, 3s and 4s are very in tune with their feelings. So your 2s are your caregivers. So we're the ones that are intuitive, pick up in a room exactly where everybody's at. We know who's in distress, who's not in distress. They don't even have to tell us their story. You can pick it up. You can almost read the story just from people's body. So we're really good at caring for people. We're really good at nurturing. Our parenting style would be a very nurturing parenting style. The problem is that we can get we can self-forget to look after our own feelings and our own needs because we're looking at getting them met through other people, because we can't quite believe that anybody would want to love us just for who we are. So we can get a little bit manipulative in trying to get our needs met, and we can go for such a long stretch of time sacrificing and putting everybody else's needs, and then all of a sudden we'll blow up because we've been pushed too far.
Yeah.
Your 3s are your achievers. You know what that's like.
I do. So Greg's a 3.
Yeah, your competitive achievers. They're just phenomenal. Like, they're just workhorses, aren't they? Like, their ability to multitask is like no other. You know, they can have all these plates just spinning. They're also masters at communication, so they can walk into a room. So, and whoever the crowd is, if it was the King of England, they would know how to communicate. If they were in a slum in India, they would know how to communicate. They're a chameleon.
I was going to say, the chameleon was the word that you used to describe Greg. Yeah.
Yeah. So they can just change, and their communication, they're amazing storytellers, just amazing communicators, and lots of energy, and the ability to put a lot of stuff on the ground. The problem with them is that because they are a chameleon, sometimes you don't know whether they're actually being truthful. So whether they're being true to self or whether they're just putting on an act. And the other thing is they're so driven by productivity and efficiency that they just have to win. They have to be successful. So they can really work themselves into the ground. Burnout can be a really big issue for them. And they'll often put the success markers, say, before family or relationships. Yeah. And then your 4s are your creatives. So they're the highly creative kind of people. Often a lot of our poets, musicians, artists are all 4s. So they have they're very comfortable with big feelings. They can have huge depth of feeling. And they're marvellous. Like, if somebody's in a grief situation or going through something really hard, they're really comfortable sitting with really dark emotions. They're comfortable with that. They think that that's real. Authenticity is a big thing for them. So being authentic in your feelings, being authentic is huge for them. And if they sense anything that's inauthentic, they'll kind of run away. The problem is that because they think that they're different, they think that they're special. So that can be a bit much at times.
We have one of our children is a 4, and it's definitely an I'm unique style personality. That's for sure.
And they kind of do this push-pull thing in their relationships. They'll kind of disappear, and because they want you to chase after them. And then next minute they'll be in your face sort of thing. Yeah. So interesting.
Very interesting.
But look, you know, we wouldn't have the poems and the music and the art without them.
Yeah.
And some of the best counsellors are 4s because they can sit comfortably with those big emotions. One of my best friends is a counsellor. She's a 4, able to sit in those big emotions because she's experiencing them all the time.
Yep.
And then your 5, 6s and your 7s are in your thinking triad. So everything's in the brain for these guys. So they're thinking all the time. So your 5s are your quiet achievers. So they're the ones who sit and observe life, and they watch life, and then they collate all that information, and then they kind of create. Often our 5s are our greatest pioneers. I think Bill Gates was a 5. They because they sit there and they observe, and they kind of go, we surely could do this better and more efficient. So they're quiet. They're often introverts. They process information. But they can also, because of that, they see that there's this scarcity of resource, so they can withhold their emotions, withhold information. So you can sometimes feel like you don't quite know them. And they also tend to compartmentalize. Mm-hmm. And then you've got your sixes, and your sixes are your loyalists. Like, they're just amazing team players. They're loyal, they're friendly, they're relationship people. They build great teams, are great team players. But they're also fearful. So they're highly fearful. So during COVID, they would have been the one that would have had 10 bottles of sanitizer in their bags and probably another 20 face masks, so there was enough for themselves and everybody else around them. They would have been the ones that would have been making sure that all the systems and processes were keeping everybody safe. Mm. So they want to make sure that everything and everyone is safe and well looked after. And then your sevens are they're just enthusiastic visionaries. Like, they just have this joy in life. They're adventurous, they're playful, they can turn a negative into a positive in 2 seconds flat. They're big picture, they process, they systemize things. They're just incredible visionary kind of people. Some of the most creative things that are happening on the planet, again, would be because of a 7. The downside for them is that sometimes what they want to do is play rather than face some of those negative things that happen in life, and to be real, to be authentic, and to actually face that there might be some hard work to do as well. So that's it in a very fast nutshell. Yeah.
And so let's just quickly talk about the fact that, so you've got 9 there. Mm-hmm. Some people might be saying, okay, well, there's probably lots of questions that's brought up, and we'll go through some of those in a moment. But, one of the things that people might be wondering is, well, what if I can see myself in several of those? Because you've got one that dominates, but you also have wings, right?
You have wings. So on either side of your number. So you're an 8, so you can lean into a 7 or a 9, and there'd be one of those wings that you would more naturally lean towards. Mm. Some say you only lean in one direction, but I kind of go yes, there's probably one that you more predominantly lean towards, but they're both there to be helpful.
Yeah.
But then you also have what we call stretch and release lines. So you have a line that goes to another number. So, for example, as a 2, I have a line that goes to a 4. So that's really helpful for me. So when I'm feeling really good, I'll get really creative.
Yep.
But then when I'm stressed, I'll go to the low side of an 8 and I'll come out firing. So that's why as a 2, when you've given too much, you'll come out exploding, just like an 8 can explode, because you've gone to the low side of an 8. So we all have different lines, stretch and release lines that we go to.
And that's that healthy, unhealthy version of yourself, right? And recognizing, okay, I've gone to this part of my personality here. So can you just explain, Sharon, how the Enneagram is different to other personality tests? Because there are so many out there. You've got, so many, people will say to me, is it like the Strengths Finder? Is it like disc profiling? Can you kind of, I guess, clarify the difference with the Enneagram?
Yeah, so I've used all those, Myers-Briggs, Strength Finder, disc. They're all helpful and they all have a place. The thing that I like about the Enneagram is that the Enneagram has so many layers. So there's so many ways in which to understand yourself. So once you start exploring, you just all of a sudden figure out. So as an Enneagram 2, my vice, if you want to put it that way, is pride. So how does that work? So that works in that I find it really hard to ask for help. So I find it very difficult to ask for help. And then if I do ask for help and it's not given, it's like, for me, that's a major trust thing. And I kind of go, well, I will never trust that person again, because it took me a lot to ask for help and then they didn't come through. So it was a double whammy. So once you start to begin to understand that, you can kind of go, well, that's a bit silly, isn't it? Like in the real world, that's a bit silly to not ask for, I actually need help here. And then if they didn't come through, I can either choose to, oh, well, just cover over, or I can go and have a conversation with them and say, hey, which I would probably do if it was my husband or my kids, or a close friend, I would probably go and say, hey, as an Enneagram 2, it took a lot for me to actually ask for help, and you didn't come through. You didn't come through in what you promised. So this is the impact that it had. So therefore, trust has actually eroded in our relationship. Yeah. And I don't want that. I want us to have a great relationship. And I don't want to have to talk about you behind your back or gossip about you or whinge about you. So I'm having a mature conversation. Yeah. Can we work on this? And so all of a sudden, then it opens up a whole new depth of relationship that you got with that person. You go to another level.
Yeah, it really does. And, it's an interesting thing because now, through doing this together with Greg, one of the things that Greg and I really struggled with, me being an 8, there's obviously that fiery side of an 8, which can come out as passion and conviction that this is wrong, that sense of justice, but also as anger. And there are two, there's both sides of that. And up until doing this exercise and learning more about this, I guess I'd started to learn that this was just a negative thing, this fieriness. But what I actually learned was that there is a really important part to that, which is that passion that, other Enneagram types won't necessarily step up and do what's got to get done to be passionate about a particular issue, or, when you've got a vision to fight for it against all odds, no matter what comes against you. But then the difficult side of that is that passion can get read as anger because it's quite intense. So Greg, up until we did this exercise, used to get cross with me all the time.
Oh, hurt, didn't he?
He was really quite hurt because he thought I was always yelling at him. He thought I was getting really angry at everything. But to me, and my argument was, I'm not yelling at you. I'm just really passionate. And we couldn't understand why there was this, because he's that feeling person and I'm that gut person. So I'd be like, in my gut, it just doesn't feel right and it's wrong and and Greg would be coming in going, I'm feeling like you're yelling at me. Stop yelling at me. And it's that, oh, that's the 8 coming out and it's that, okay. And so now we can talk about it in the sense that I'll go, okay, my sense of justice is rising to the top here. Yeah. And I'll actually use those words. I'll say, justice is coming out. Can I bounce off you for a sec? And then he'll go, okay, cool. She's going to get fiery and passionate for a minute, but it's not directed at me. He understands that better. But also there's that understanding that actually, I'm upset about something and I'm in a difficult position at the moment and I've got to be very careful because I'm going to be read by a lot of people right now as being angry, which will probably be correct, and I need to tone it back and be aware that not everyone feels that same way and it's going to have a different impact on different Enneagram types.
Because as an 8, when you're doing that anger thing, you're actually looking for intimacy. So
it's a connection thing.
For you, it's not that you're wanting to disengage with the other person. You're actually wanting to go deeper with the other person, and it's actually a way in which you're expressing your vulnerability.
Yeah, it's that in itself is actually a really funny conversation when you look at it after the fact, because often, for Greg and I, a disagreement will look something like me getting really fiery and Greg's going, stop pushing me away, and I'm going, I want to connect with you. And he's going, but you're so angry. Yeah. I'm like, yes, because I want to connect. And you can start to see that in the behavior of other people who've got a similar personality type too, because you go, why are they so angry with everybody? And we've got one of our kids that I struggle with the most, who I suspect is an 8, who is very much the same way. And, of course, you put fire with fire, that can become quite challenging. But, I was talking to some 2s recently. Interestingly enough, we've got all 2s that work for us.
Okay.
And every staff member we've hired somehow has always been a 2. And I was talking –
really good at sales.
At sales. Well, interestingly, they're also very, very good at customer service, which is why I think they end up in that place, because they're such, connected personalities.
Yeah.
But this particular person had recently got married and had married another two. And she was telling me about this hike they went on and how during this hike they kept asking each other, they had gone quiet, they kept asking each other, are you okay? And are you okay? And are you okay? And by the time they got to the halfway through this hike, and these two had actually done the Enneagram before, so they already knew what this was. And they were so in tune to the fact that the other person was feeling a little off, but what they didn't understand was that the reason the other person felt off was because they were worried about this person and then worried about, so they were simultaneously worrying about each other, which was creating this scenario where they were both becoming quite down and depressed during this hike for no apparent reason other than they were reading that the other person was feeling a bit blue. And it was all because they were bouncing off each other until they stopped and went, hang on a second, why are you feeling this way? And they had that real conversation and they said, oh my gosh, it's our twos coming out here. Yeah. And they were just feeding off each other's.
I'm okay if you're okay.
Yeah, exactly. And suddenly it was all fine.
Yeah.
So there's so much understanding that comes with, one thing I would, I guess, like to clarify here is it doesn't make it easier.
No, it sometimes can actually make it harder.
Yeah. I think there was a time I rang you and went, this is really challenging knowing all of this.
Yeah. At first it can be very confronting and it can be like, oh, I don't like that about myself. But then it is freeing after a period of time. But then you've got to make the choice. So you've got the choice of whether you're just going to keep your old routines going. And there's a price to pay for that, or whether you're actually going to do the work and actually try to become more self-aware and then change. I recently had a conversation with a one. I'd passed on a great podcast. It was just phenomenal for ones. And she got quite emotional listening to it. And she said, oh, they just read my mail, my partner was looking after my child. When I came back in the room, I didn't see them, all the weekend play that they'd done and how happy, the child was and how happy he was. All what I saw was breadcrumbs on the bench top, the laundry not being done, da-da-da-da-da-da. And she was talking about how if she didn't change, she would eventually lose her marriage because of this one thing. But then a few weeks later when I was talking to her, she said, it's hard though. I don't know that I actually want to do the work. I said, well, there's a price to pay either way.
Yep.
It's like anything, isn't it? You put the work in and you grow and there's fruit in that. Or if you choose to just keep going the way you're going, there's price there as well.
Yeah.
You just got to work out which price you want.
Well, that's right. And it is not an easy process. You don't simply learn this and go, okay, great, I know everything now. I know what I need to do.
I'm still learning.
Oh, I imagine that we all will for the rest of our lives. When I guess the next question we should probably answer is how do people find out what their personality type is? Because, I found it really interesting before we'd done the test. I think for me it was always pretty clear what I was, and I didn't have, I wasn't at all surprised. I wasn't grumpy about it in any way. I was like, yep, all right, that just gives me a bit of understanding. And then I started that journey. With Greg, however, I know that for him, his personality type was very challenging for him. And for a long time, he really didn't like or accept what that type was. And he felt that there were more negatives than positives to it. So sometimes that work can, for me, and I suppose it's part of that personality type as it is. I was like, great, let's move forward and let's work on what we've got to work on. But for some, I think even the personality type itself can be really hard to know what to do. So I guess the next question is then, how does someone accurately assess what they are and know for sure that this is my main personality type here?
Yeah. So it can take a while to figure out who you are. And sometimes we can mistype ourselves. For example, it's very easy for a 9 and a 2 to mistype one another because there's some similarities between the two. So sometimes it can take time, and especially if you haven't done a lot of personal work. So, for example, people who are coming fresh out of trauma, it can take a long time to figure out who you are because you don't know who you are, because if you've been in a family violence situation, you've lost your sense of identity. You've lost who you are. So it just takes a number of years to figure out who you are and all that. So it can take time to just figure it out. I find the Enneagram test, which I think we'll put a link to in the show notes, it's the most accurate one that I know of. So they've just done years and years and years of testing and refining and the algorithms behind it. There's just such a science behind it. And I haven't yet had anybody who's got their report and then read it and gone, oh, no, that's not me. And then most of them have gone, oh, gosh, they read my mail. We will also link in the show notes, or I just have a PDF where you can just ask yourself questions if you don't have the money or you don't want to spend the money on that test, where you can just ask questions, and most people can narrow it down to at least one, maybe two of the types. So that sort of then narrows it down a little bit. And there's a great book by Ian Morgan Cron called The Road Back to You, and I would just recommend anybody read that. And again, you'll figure out from that who you are. But it's like anything. If you want to know who you are, you have to invest, you have to invest something in yourself. For me, the amount of money that you spend on your doing the test to discover your Enneagram type pays off dividends. Like my kids reckon it was the best marriage counselling they'd ever done. They'd been together, I think 8-9 years. They did the Enneagram. All of a sudden light bulbs came on and they went, wow, this is cheaper than going and having counselling. And I don't know how many times I've heard that from people where they've gone, oh, wow, it was a big investment, but then it was worth it.
And so there are several different versions of this, right? So while there is an investment, there are levels of investment. So we'll put in the show notes, there's the questions you've provided, which people can grab that for free. That's just a gift that you've given us, which is awesome. It won't necessarily do the full accurate assessment, but at least it's a way to get a bit of an idea. From there's two different versions of the test that they can do, right?
Yeah, so there's a short version where it'll give you your basic, and then there's a more comprehensive one, which I just love because it gives you it goes right into your communication, how you like to receive feedback, conflict, what sort of team player you are. It's just such a brilliant report. I personally think it takes 2 years to actually work through the report and to understand everything that it's saying in there. So I think that it's just a great investment. I think it's about $180.
It's not a crazy amount. I mean, I think it was about $300 for both Greg and I to do it. And, and you get that report and it actually gives you some exercises as well. It shows you how you interact with the different Enneagram types, what your wings are, what, the healthy version of you, the unhealthy version of you, so you can recognize where you are at any given time. And you do change depending on what season you're going through. Although when I say change, I mean you fluctuate between healthy, unhealthy. But one question I did want to ask you is, can you change Enneagram type?
Well, they say technically no, but you can certainly grow and mature and lean off and learn. So, for example, for me, my son-in-law is a 5, and I've found the 5 the hardest to actually get to know and understand. But one of the things I love about him is his ability to sit back and reflect, and then he'll come up with a totally different solution to something. So now I'm finding I'm taking a lot more time in making decisions, and so I'll actually pull back now because I'm trying to learn from him.
Yeah.
because I've seen the benefit of what happens. But then he's also seen the benefit of what happens. Sharon gets stuff done. So he's trying to not be faster, but to certainly be more action-oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so it's that thing about learning and growing.
It's interesting what you just say there, because I think one of the other things that's been very interesting about, doing this in marriage is you also recognize the strength of the other person and the weakness of your personality type. And so there's often scenarios where Greg and I will look at each other and go, I think you need to step in on this one and I need to take a little step back, because I know, and we both know where, for me, for example, if we go into a very confrontational situation that is filled with passion and hurt and challenge. Maybe it's with one of the kids, maybe it's with a situation that's happened with a family member, or even, let's look at it from a work perspective. One of the things about growing our business and reaching more people, I mean, this podcast has now got over 50,000 listeners every single week, which is amazing. But with that comes the negative side. And as we've grown, we've started to receive more of that. We get the positive, but we also get the negative. And so Greg has naturally stepped into that space of, when we see negative feedback come in, I'm going to shield Sam from that, because I know how Sam will respond and how she'll take it on, versus how he can actually disconnect from that a little bit more. Yeah. And, again, with confrontational situations, it'll often be a matter of Greg will step in first because the fire and the passion from Sam sometimes can actually make the situation worse rather than better. But also, when there are projects that we need to get done, Greg will say, I want you to take the lead on this, because I really want this to happen and I know that you'll make it happen. Whereas, he recognizes that he'll want to make certain things perfect and he'll be focused on various different things. So it's good, I think, to recognize that in other people as well as yourself, and go, actually, this is not going to be a strength of mine, this particular situation. And I'm really blessed that I have people around me who have a strength that I don't necessarily have. And that I've found very powerful.
Yeah. Well, that one that you gave about Greg is a classic example of probably one of the challenges of being a 3 is that they struggle to be in touch with their own feelings. But strength of that is that they can look at negative stuff and be very logical about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And he is quite great at just writing a response that's really professional without getting really super offended personally, whereas I read it and I'll just be broken down in tears in a minute.
Because you're aware of your feelings.
Yeah, but I want to justify and explain, and my energy will go there instead of focusing on where it probably should be going. So it's a really interesting thing, and it's a little bit the same with our team members, because they're 2s and it's their job as, community management. They take care of you guys when, our members and, our subscribers, et cetera. It's their job to look after you. But when something's not positive, they'll pour their heart and soul into making that person happy, even when possibly that we were never going to be able to do that. And so sometimes it's very difficult, I think, just by observing a 2 for them to know when to stop trying to make someone else happy and then focus, change their focus. And I've seen them go to great lengths to please someone that could never have been pleased.
Yeah.
But, I wouldn't have recognized that without knowing
the
Enneagram. So there's those 3 tests. So we'll put those in the show notes. So people can choose to do the free download with the questions that you've given. They can click on the link and do the cheaper version, or the full report, which is what Greg and I have done, and I highly recommend it. And that's the one that you talked about. Is really comprehensive. There is also, and I do personally recommend this, because it's one thing to get the report, but it's another thing to actually work through it, particularly if you are in a marriage situation or a partnership situation where you're wanting to really, understand each other a little bit better. And that is to go through counseling's probably not the right word here, is it? It's more of a guidance support system that because we actually worked with you and we purchased a coaching, would probably be a better way of putting it, a coaching package to go with that, so that we could get some support and help from you to help us work through what we've now learned. So that's an option people could look at doing as well.
Yeah, that's an option. We can do mentoring. We can do it on Zoom or whatever, whatever the technology is that people have.
So, because we've got people all over the world. So somebody wants to do that with you, Sharon.
Yeah.
You do have some availability to have those sessions with people.
Yeah. I've got a couple of clients that are in the US and another one that's in the UK. Yeah.
So we'll put
the beauty
some
of technology, isn't it?
It is the beauty. And it's one of the things I love about where we're at now is that we can literally connect with anyone from anywhere around the world.
Yeah.
So we'll put that link as well for people to contact you. Should they want to do that process, they can do that with you personally. And so I guess the other thing I just want to kind of walk through here is if people want to on their own learn a little bit more about the Enneagram itself. You talked about the Ian Morgan Cron book, which is great. There are also some great podcasts out there.
Yeah, so Ian's got a great podcast. The thing that I like about Ian is that he laughs a lot, tells a great story, very earthy, and he's also a trained psychotherapist as well. So he's kind of got that background as well, so it keeps everybody safe. So that is called Typology, that podcast. And I just kind of think it's a great way to enter into, because they're always just interviewing ordinary people. And so sometimes they know their Enneagram type, sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
But, you just learn lots from that particular podcast. There are other podcasts, but they're more academic or they're more,
I did really enjoy that podcast. And I actually listened to the audiobook through Audible of The Road Back to You, but also The Road Back to Us. And what I loved about that one was it talked about and helped me identify the different Enneagram types in the people around me.
Yes.
And so it talks about how you could recognize various personalities. And they actually, in that, he does it with another woman as well.
Yeah.
And she gives a lot of examples of actual scenarios and stories to help understand, okay, that's yes. And through that, I was able to recognize our kids, my mum, and my dad, I was able to kind of piece some of those together. And it's actually changed the way that I interact with those people a little bit more now, because I look at something and go, that's the peacemaker coming out in my mum right now.
Yeah.
Well, that's the one coming out in my sister. And it gives you that sense of grace and understanding rather than a sense of, that just annoys me about that person. Suddenly it's that's who they are. That's part of who they are.
Yeah.
So that was actually something I wanted to ask you just as we sort of start to wrap up. And I want to get to our 4 fun questions because they're always my favorites. But how can someone identify the Enneagram type in somebody else without that, if that person's not willing to necessarily do a test?
Yeah, so you have to be careful with that. You can kind of say they seem to be presenting in a certain way, but we don't actually know what the motivation is underneath. So, for example, I can look like a 3 in the way in which I go about my work and that. But my actual motivation is the thing that drives me is the story that I learned that unless I look after everybody else, I'm not lovable.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that you can't see.
Yeah.
So whilst you can kind of go, they seem to be presenting like this without them actually knowing, you actually can't know. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's a really difficult one. And I think even in the identifying of family members, I'm able to see certain things, but you're often pinpointing things that come up when they're not at their best or when they're at their very best, because they're the highs and lows. So I think it's like an ongoing observation probably is.
So it just enables you to have a conversation.
Yeah. It does. And, I actually asked our family members to do a test. Some of them were willing, some weren't. But the thing is that the more people you get to do that or the more people you learn from that have done it, it also helps you better understand others a little bit more as well. Totally. Which is very interesting. But I did notice, and you've got to be a little bit careful with the free assessments because our kids then got quite into it and started doing them, which was great. But they did them 3 or 4 times over a 6-month period and it came up differently every time. Yeah. So without doing an official test, you don't want to put too much emphasis, I don't think, on
I mean, that's the same with Myers-Briggs and DISC. There's some freebies out there. They kind of sometimes, you can luck and land on the right one, and then other times you can't. And also teenagers are still evolving and emerging. So.
They are, and that was the other thing I was going to ask is, are we all born with our Enneagram type?
I think that we are it's both both a nature thing and a nurture thing. So we probably have a disposition when we're born, but then I do think that life shapes our story.
Yeah.
I think the things that happen to us and the way we interpret the world around us, it just shapes who we are.
Yeah. I would totally agree with that. So I think this has been a really fascinating chat, and I know this has probably left a lot of people with lots of questions, and if you're anything like me and you're listening right now, you are fascinated by this, and I can't recommend enough doing this process, if nothing else, just for you. Even if you've got a partner and you're thinking, I wish they could do it, worry less about the other people and focus on what you can learn about you, because that will change the way that you interact. It will also change the way that you both have grace for yourself, but grace for others. So, I've mentioned that one of the things I recognized about myself after doing this was how I can be perceived. And so it allowed me to tailor a little bit more, and I don't get it right by any stretch of the imagination, but tailor a little bit more my response or my behavior, knowing that it's not the way that everybody operates.
Yeah.
And I think that's, it's a really powerful thing to be learning, but doing things like the podcasts, listening to things, reading these books, it's fascinating, but it is part of that growth process and really helpful.
Definitely.
So, Sharon, I've got to ask the question now. I know we've already listed off a couple of books here, but I do want to ask, what's your favourite book to add to our accelerator book list? We love hearing our guests' favourite books, and as you've seen my library out here in the hallway, I am a prolific book collector, so keen to hear what your favourite book is.
Oh, well, that's probably a hard question. But you had the Atomic Habits out there.
I did, with James Clear, yes.
I loved that one. I thought that was just amazing.
Yes.
That one, yeah. And
that
apart from that, I just on the Enneagram, it would be just The Road Back to You.
Yeah.
I can't think what his latest one was, but anyway.
He's got multiple, doesn't he? Because it's when you do look him up. Yeah. I actually, for that reason, like to listen to the audio version. There's some books I find are better audio versus reading, and it's one of those ones I really enjoyed listening to the audio book. And I actually did it. I did a big long 10K walk one day and listened to almost the whole thing in just one go. And, my walk got longer and longer because I didn't want to stop listening. So, it's a really good one. Sharon, if you could have a superpower, any superpower, what would it be and why?
For me, it would be the ability to become love, not to do loving things, but to be love, so that in any given situation you could, for me, it's about being like Jesus, who just seemed to know what to say and how to be with people. I still find in this crazy world it's hard to listen, it's hard to stop, it's hard to give the gift of presence and witness. So for me, I would just want to become love.
Oh, that's a good one. I love that. I love that. And your favourite quote?
It's one by Bob Goff, and he says men and women were created to work together, not separate work, but together work. It's a way of love, which is the most powerful. It's the most powerful thing we have on the planet. And I just think if men and women, if we could just learn how to work together, understand one another, be compassionate, I think that we could come up with a lot more positive solutions to some of the challenges that are happening in our world. Take out power, ego, all that sort of stuff. Just partnership, understanding who we are. Yeah, I think there'd be a lot more positive creativity that's happening in the world.
Yeah. That's so true. And the last one, definitely my favourite question of all, if you could go back in time and say one thing to your past self, what would that be?
For me, it would be, and this is going to be a funny one for it too, would be to trust your gut and not to allow shame to silence you. For me, menopause was a great gift. So I actually think that it's God's way of making sure that his girls speak up and really find their key work and voice to do so. I think it's a protective thing, because I think, you know, in your teens, there's a lot going on, but, you know, you are in touch with some of that dreamy stuff, that vision of who you want to be. But then life happens, and as women, we tend to submerge a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And then menopause comes along and it forces you, you know, all these emotions come up because of the hormones, etc. But it's also deeper than that. It's just like in teens, just because your body's changing hormonally doesn't mean that it's just a medical thing that's happening or a biological thing. There's actually really deep identity work that's happening in your teens, and it's the same with in your second half of life. And so for me, looking back, the one thing I would want to say to the younger version of me is not to shut up on those core things that you felt passionate about.
Yeah. And that's
Stay true.
such an amazing and very, very important point. And I feel like particularly, and this was one of the things I really noticed through doing this Enneagram exercise, was there was so much that even as a teenager you start to get beaten down.
Yeah.
Life kind of
so
beats
painful.
you down, right? And you really do learn to disconnect from those parts of yourself that really truly make you who you are. And you know, doing this exercise, or you know, understanding a little bit more through the Enneagram was a really great way of understanding, you know, particularly when you lose that sense of self and you think, who am I and how do I show up in the world authentically, is understanding what makes you you.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of that discovery process, I know particularly for me, and I think you've just, you know, reiterated that with your own process of discovery, is that a lot of the things that make us who we are and special and unique are the very things that get suppressed as we go through life. And learning to love those things about ourselves and let them back out, you know, is a really empowering process.
Yeah. Very empowering.
Challenging sometimes, but empowering.
Yeah.
So, oh, look, thank you so much for coming in today,
right.
Sharon.
Thanks for having me.
It's been great doing this in person. It's so unusual. I don't often get to do this. So,
it's the two of me. I just prefer the relationship.
Well, you messaged and I said we do this, you know, via Zoom or online, and she said no, let's do this in person. I was like, well, that's a great concept. We do live in the same town. We could. No, I think it's really beautiful that we're able to do this together, and the perfect topic to talk about together as well. So I think, you know, just I really encourage our listeners, you know, if this is sort of sounded like, hey, this is something I really want to investigate further, you know, go in and do one of those assessments, invest in yourself, you know, with that time. Yes, you know, a couple of those examples do have some financial commitment to them, but they are so worth it. And of course, if you do have the time and you want to reach out to Sharon and get some coaching with her as well, probably the most, you know, and I would agree with what your kids have said, it was better than any other marriage counselling we did. And any time that we do talk to anybody now, we always lead with, so we've done the Enneagram and I'm an 8 and he's a 3. And most people look at us like, what?
Yeah.
And I feel like, how could any counsellor not understand this? Because it feels so, once you know it, it feels like it's so critically important. So yeah, thank you so much for shedding some light.
It was good. We had fun.
We did have fun. And thank you again to all of our beautiful listeners for joining us again this week. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I know it's been a little bit different to our normal episodes, but I really think both in business, personally, and relationships, you know, even when it comes to working with your team, this is such an important thing to remember, is that we all show up in the world differently, and having grace for yourself as much as those around you is really powerful and really important. So thank you for tuning in again. We love you guys. We appreciate you. And if you've loved this episode, you know the drill. Please subscribe, but also share this with somebody. If this has spoken to you and you think it could be really useful for somebody else that's on your heart, share this episode with them. Let them have a listen and perhaps, they might also get the gift of learning a little bit more about themselves as well. So thank you again. Have an amazing week and bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us in this episode of the Direct Selling Accelerator podcast. If you love listening and you found that this was helpful for your direct selling business, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also check out the recommended video that's popped up on your screen right here. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye for now.